Hello and welcome. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India, India's voice to the world. I'm Gautam Roy, and India's G20 summit has made global headlines through the day today. That and much more coming up in the next hour. G20 summit adopts the New Delhi Leaders Declaration. Host India succeeds in forging a complete consensus on all developmental and geopolitical issues. The African Union becomes a G20 member. The 55-nation bloc joins as a permanent member at the New Delhi G20 summit. Global Biofuels Alliance is launched under India's G20 presidency on the sidelines of the G20 Leaders Summit, bringing together 19 countries. And India's G20 summit produces another landmark initiative. Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment will build the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, rivaling China's Belt and Road Initiative. And a 6.8 magnitude earthquake shakes Morocco, claiming over 1,000 lives, making it the deadliest quake to hit the North African country in over 6 decades. India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant has spoken about the Delhi Declaration as well at the special event which saw a bevy of top officials really addressing the media. And he said that under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the Green Development Pact is accelerating with strong and sustainable growth.
We've achieved a very major Green Development Pact in today's world of climate action and climate finance. Every single country has come together to focus on Green Development Pact, which has financing, which has focused on global greenhouse gas emission by 43% by 2030, which has a doubling provision of adaptive finance by 2025, which has a global biofuel alliance, which has a completely new principles of life for sustainable development, which has ending plastic pollution, which has reducing disaster risk, and a whole lot of other components put together as the Green Development Pact of the leaders of G20 countries for a greener world of tomorrow.
And just like Amitabh Kant said, inclusive growth, accelerating actions to deal with climate change, and increasing medical supplies to be future-ready for health emergencies, among others, are the focus areas of the G20 New Delhi Leaders Declaration adopted on Saturday. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced the adoption of the declaration during the second session of the G20 summit, titled One Family. Dheeraj Das reports.
Day one of the G20 summit in India's capital saw the adoption of the New Delhi G20 Leaders Declaration, where countries were able to come to a quick consensus on global issues.
हमारी टीम्स के हार्डवर्क से और आप सभी के सहयोग से नई दिल्ली G20 लीडर्स समिट डिक्लेरेशन पर सहमति बनी है। मेरा प्रस्ताव है कि इस लीडर्स डिक्लेरेशन को भी एडॉप्ट किया जाए। मैं इस डिक्लेरेशन को एडॉप्ट करने की घोषणा करता हूं।
India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar said G20 New Delhi Leaders Declaration focuses on promoting strong, sustainable, balanced and inclusive growth.
The declaration that the leaders have agreed on today focuses on promoting strong, sustainable balanced, and inclusive growth. It seeks to accelerate progress on SDGs and has come up with an action plan accordingly. It envisages a Green Development Pact for a sustainable future. It endorses high-level principles on lifestyle for sustainable development, voluntary principles on hydrogen, the Chennai Principles for a Sustainable and Resilient Blue Economy, and the Deccan Principles on food security and nutrition, among others.
India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, during the media briefing on G20 summit in New Delhi, mentioned key outcomes of the G20 summit that strengthens global economy.
Let me share with you just some of the key achievements of the Indian presidency, the finance track. First one is the outcomes which are focused on strengthening the MDBs to address shared global challenges of the 21st century. So under this strengthening MDBs, there are 4 key highlights that I'd like to bring to your notice. The first one is agreement on the need for a better, bigger, and more effective MDBs. It is so necessary to have better, bigger, and more effective MDBs because the developmental demands from all across the globe is so high, these institutions will have to be better and bigger. This is also going to contribute to enhancing representation and voice of developing countries in the decision making.
The declaration focuses on accelerating strong, sustainable, balanced and inclusive growth, effective implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, pursuing low greenhouse gas or carbon emissions through climate-resilient and environmentally sustainable development pathways, to improve access to medical countermeasures and facilitate more supplies and production capacities in developing countries, promote resilient growth by urgently and effectively addressing debt vulnerabilities in developing countries, to scale up financing from all sources of accelerating progress on SDGs, accelerate efforts and enhance resources towards achieving the Paris Agreement, including its temperature goal, pursue reforms for better, bigger and more effective multilateral development banks to address global challenges, improve access to digital services and digital public infrastructure and leverage digital transformation opportunities to boost sustainable and inclusive growth, promote sustainable, quality, healthy, safe and gainful employment, close gender gaps and promote the full, equal, effective and meaningful participation of women in the economy as decision makers, better integrate the perspectives of developing countries into future G20 agendas and strengthen the voice of developing countries in global decision-making. Prime Minister Narendra Modi described the adoption of the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration as historic. Taking to social media platform X, Prime Minister Modi said, "History has been created with the adoption of New Delhi Leaders' Declaration. United in consensus and spirit, we pledge to work collaboratively for a better, more prosperous and harmonious future. My gratitude to all fellow G20 members for their support and cooperation." The adoption of New Delhi Leaders' Declaration was welcomed by several Indian Union ministers and officials who said the historic document recognizes Prime Minister Narendra Modi's emphasis on human-centric globalization. Dheeraj Das, DT India.
And there was another landmark moment at the G20 summit under India's presidency as the African Union was formally invited to join the committee of the G20 nations. It's now the 21st member of the G20.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi made a history today, inviting the African Union to become a permanent member of the exclusive group of 20 nations.
सबका साथ की भावना से ही भारत ने प्रस्ताव रखा था कि अफ्रीकन यूनियन को G20 की स्थायी सदस्यता दी जाए। मेरा विश्वास है कि इस प्रस्ताव पर हम सबकी सहमति है।
An obviously delighted AU chairperson Azali Assoumani took his seat at the high table. The African continent finally admitted after years of trying. The African Union is a body of 55 member nations from the African continent. Headquartered at Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, the AU was founded on May 26, 2001. The president of Comoros, Azali Assoumani is the present chairperson of the African Union. After joining G20, the AU becomes the second largest group within the forum after the EU. The Union's role has evolved to include the acceleration of political and socio-economic integration on the continent. The most important decisions of the AU are made by the Assembly of the African Union, a semi-annual meeting of the heads of state and governments of its member countries. As the newest and 21st member of the group, it's expected to bring African positions on the global issues to the table and seek further investment in the continent from the group's richer member states. Amit Mukherjee, DD India.
And the spokesperson to the President of South Africa, Vincent Magwenya, spoke exclusively to DD India's Akshay Dongre on African Union's inclusion in the G20 and Prime Minister Modi's role in turning India into the voice of the Global South. Take a look.
We are in New Delhi right now for the G20 summit in the national capital of India, and today is the day when the African Union has been inducted into the G20. The wait has been quite long. We also have a special person here with us. We have Mr. Vincent Magwenya, the spokesperson of the President of South Africa. So thank you so much for speaking with us. Today is a very important day for Africa, the entire continent. How do you see the development that have taken place?
Well, it's a very positive development that we are delighted about as South Africa. As you will know, President Ramaphosa has been at the forefront of advocating for the African Union's inclusion into the G20. Last year at the summit in Bali, he further underscored that point, and we think it's a development that talks to the whole principle of inclusivity to India's presidency with respect to focusing this summit on the smaller countries, on ensuring that the voice of the developing economic countries is equally expressed and heard during the summit.
Prime Minister has vocally spoken about during the entire presidency that it should be heard equally. If we look at G20, the European Union has been part from the very beginning. Do you think that it was long overdue, the inclusion of African Union into the G20 grouping?
No, indeed, it was long overdue, but we now welcome the opportunity. And what is important is how do we now move forward together as the African continent alongside these largest economies in the world to collectively tackle all the common challenges that we are faced with. These are not challenges that can be...
So, momentous occasion for the African continent in New Delhi. Still to come up on DD India News are... The G20 summit in New Delhi also leads to the launch of the Global Biofuels Alliance to reduce the world's dependence on fossil fuels. And another landmark moment, top leaders also come together to announce the India, Middle East, Europe Green Economic Corridor. Also at the end of day one of the G20 India Summit, sees President Draupadi Murmu hosting all the leaders and select guests for a gala dinner.
The relevance of the G20, the contemporary challenges that the G20 as an institution faces, and the future of this institution, whether it is going to be able to solve the global problems and live up to people's expectations.
20 human beings sitting around a table looking at each other in the eyes, face to face, agreeing to a consensus communique with commitments, lots of them, over 400 some year.
Yeah.
But they all know that within a year, they're going to be back around the same table largely, and they'll have to look each other in the face.
Having the African Union there is a particularly good development, I think. However, unlike the European Union, the African Union is a regional association of countries.
Yeah.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Gautam Roy. And we've been telling you all about an action-packed day one of the G20 summit in New Delhi under India's presidency. It saw the leaders unanimously adopt the Delhi Declaration and the addition of the African Union to the G20, among other developments as well. And joining me now is Ambassador Dr. Bhaskar Balakrishnan, former senior diplomat over a web link, who served as India's envoy to Greece and Cuba, apart from serving in other capacities in Europe, Africa and West Asia, as well as in international organizations. Good evening to you, Dr. Balakrishnan. And at the same time, we're also joined by my colleague Shubhendu Ghosh from Bharat Mandapam, which is the venue of the G20 summit. Shubhendu, it's been an action-packed day, and that would be an understatement, won't it?
Absolutely, Gautam. What a day it has been, really, not just for India's presidency, but in the history of G20. If I can just show you the location, the beautifully lit Bharat Mandapam in the background, the beautiful lights, the colors. This is where the world leaders are sitting together after a historic day, hugely productive. Not only has the grouping, the G20, become bigger, in the next edition is going to be G21, greater space to the global south, African Union becomes a permanent member. But then, just a few hours after the inclusion of African Union, Prime Minister Narendra Modi makes a surprisingly early and historic statement that the New Delhi Declaration has been adopted by 100% consensus. 83 paragraphs long New Delhi Declaration covers diverse aspects from climate change to sustainable finance to women-led development to manner in which the global economic order can be reformed through multilateral institutions. All of those issues, all the countries, the G20 countries, 19 countries and European Union coming together, speaking in one voice. So a huge diplomatic victory there for India as the G20 president. And as we speak, the leaders would be having perhaps rather satisfying dinner together. It's a very productive, in a way, conclusion to the G20. There'll be more meetings, of course, earlier, next few weeks. However, the New Delhi Declaration proves the manner in which India's presidency has been a great success.
Definitely. Just stick around, Shubhendu and Dr. Balakrishnan. Would you say that it would be a gross understatement to put across that the first day of the G20 summit in New Delhi was rather eventful? Did anyone expect such spectacular outcomes, considering so many other issues or players could have played spoilsports?
Yeah, it's a great day for India. I mean, it's a great day for our people. And I think it's also a great day for all the countries. There is a sense of relief that, the declaration could be adopted by consensus. And I think there's an enormous amount of appreciation for India, who managed to pull this off with the help of friends of India, like South Africa, Brazil, Indonesia, and others who worked quietly and got this through. So there's a sense of relief and I think sense of gratitude to India for having done this, so that we can now move forward with the substantive components or substantive contents of the declaration. It is a bit unusual for the declaration to be adopted on the first day itself. Normally, this is done at the end towards the end of the meeting. But I think this is a good step, because once you have agreement, why not, adopt it and proceed with the normal agenda? I think this is entirely in the hands of the chairman how to handle this. And I think this was the right step. So tomorrow we have a sort of anticlimax. We have a session 3, which is on future. And that could also be quite productive and interesting, because, in the future, there are a lot of challenges ahead. And especially challenges, if not tackled now, will grow into big challenges. So I think it's been a great day for India, and I think great sense of relief. And well done, Team India.
What did you hear about it, Shubhendu? You were there at Bharat Mandapam and the media center there that's been put up for the entire international media as well, over 3,000 people there too. How did they react when that announcement was made? Was it to them like a strike while the iron is hot kind of a moment, as Ambassador Balakrishnan felt, or was it as if not giving, once there is agreement, too much time to ruminate, another 24 hours at least for all the leaders, and then come up with that announcement? Shubhendu, could you hear me? Well, it seems we lost that link with Shubhendu, but Ambassador Balakrishnan, what do you really make of the Delhi Declaration itself? Does it live up to the kind of values the member countries hold dear and the kind of actions they need to undertake to tackle global challenges?
Yeah, I think the declaration is very, very substantive, very rich in content, and it reflects the enormous amount of work which has gone into all the working groups and the engagement groups meetings in the past 8 months. I mean, which is the sort of record for the group G20. No, there are some major things which are there in the declaration. I can just look at it. The global biofuels initiative is a huge thing for our farmers, for our and also for our energy independence, and also for climate action. And it could lead to huge number of jobs. Then, of course, there is the digital public infrastructure which is being made available to other countries who want to use it. That is also a part of the thing. Then there is the what was announced at the side was this major initiative of the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, which is a connectivity corridor, but connectivity in the broadest sense. It includes electricity, it includes pipelines, it includes rail transit, and it includes digital. So it's a huge, very, very big pipeline. The connectivity pipeline is multi-domain. Then the declaration contains affirmation that we will move ahead with the plastics treaty, which is already, there is a draft available. It will be discussed in Nairobi in November. And G20 firmly said that we want an ambitious treaty. And India is one of the leaders who has actually tabled this proposal in the UNEP. So this is a very important treaty because plastics have now penetrated into the entire environment, into the food chain, into the biological systems of animals and even humans. And the threat of microplastics and nanoplastics in the environment is extremely serious. It could affect future generations. So we have to deal with this. It's going to be tough because the plastics industry is involved. They will have to play their part in this, and also consumers will have to play their part. There is a decision to accelerate the SDGs, which we have fallen behind because of COVID. We are halfway through it. In the next 2 weeks, we will have a summit in New York to discuss the SDGs and look at where we stand halfway, because we have 7 years more to go. And we have to do something, especially on the side of finance, to accelerate progress towards it. So these are all some of the, a few of the things which I have seen. I mean, the declaration is full of all kinds of things. I'm not talking about the stuff on finance and trade and those things. I'm talking about the non-finance side of it, the women's empowerment. So it's a very rich and substantive declaration, and I think it'll be a kind of beacon in the future of the G20.
Yes, and those commitments on climate finance, if they're carried through, then of course we can all rejoice because that will go a long way in addressing the kind of challenges that we face. Net zero emissions and all that, all those goals that are there. And we'll be looking at the next COP meeting as well. That will be hosted by Saudi Arabia. Then that becomes very relevant too. Thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador Balakrishnan, to talk about it. Now, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi also launched the much-anticipated Global Biofuels Alliance, which was talked about Ambassador Balakrishnan as well at the G20 summit on Saturday. Set up at par with the International Solar Alliance, the Biofuels Alliance focus is on accelerated adoption of biofuels. Led by India, the Global Biofuels Alliance seeks to create a coalition of governments, international organizations and industry stakeholders dedicated to advancing the adoption of biofuels. Here's an exclusive interview of India's Petroleum Minister Hardeep Singh Puri, who's spoken to DD India's Tapas Bhattacharya on a number of topics ranging from the G20, the inclusion of the African Union and the significance of the Biofuels Alliance.
The first day, first show of G20 has been a major hit, and to talk about that, I have with me Union Minister Hardeep Singh Puri. Sir, first day, the Delhi Declaration, the joining of the African Union, and now this Biofuel Alliance. How do you see this?
all I can say is that I think when India assumed its presidency of the G20, and no one has any doubt that the Modi government would not only put its best foot forward, but you would have a presidency conducted on a more elaborate, comprehensive and inclusive manner than any other G20 presidency. So this is truly the people's presidency. I mean, I'm not saying we should measure it by the fact that over 200 events or 220 events were held in 60 different cities of the country. But I'm saying look at it in terms of what the content is. Again, there is the spectacular historical, cultural, civilizational aspect and the Indian hospitality. And I don't think anyone will doubt the fact that the Indian G20 presidency has set up a new template for that. But if you look at the content, I mean, you mentioned the African Union. Let me just spend 2 minutes, a minute and a half on the African. Look, the 54 nations of the African continent have all along received, people have said we must do something for Africa. There have been plans for Africa. As a professional diplomat of it. But, if you have a plurilateral grouping like the G20 gaining resonance and acquiring a momentum, isn't it better for the African Union to be seated at that high table at representation?
Right. So, last question I'd like to ask you. This particular alliance has 19 members. Do we expect more members to join? Also the fact that, this particular alliance will have Brazil and US. Both are, highest producer of ethanol. So, that's going to also help.
No, of course it will help. The पहली बात तो ये है, मैं आपको बताना चाहता हूँ कि Global Biofuels Alliance सिर्फ inter-governmental process नहीं है. This is more than an intergovernmental process. It has the stakeholders. It has the producers of biofuels. Brazil में एक cooperative society है, UNICA, वो है. US में Grain Council है. और 12 international organizations, the top international organizations, all, because there's potential. अभी तो शुरुआत हुई है. 19 is the countries now, including both producers, consumers, some G20 invitees. But I think the process has just begun.
Much appreciated time. So that was Union Minister Hardeep Singh Puri saying that this is just a start and we might see more countries coming up and joining this particular alliance. With camera person Shubham, this is Tapush Bhattacharya for Today India from Delhi.
Yes, the global biofuels market right now is about $100 billion, but potential is taken to $200 billion as well in the coming years, building up to 2035. And we'll be seeing much of that happen in India as well. Now, still to come on DD India News Hour. Prime Minister Modi holds a series of bilaterals as well on the sidelines of day one of the G20 summit with his UK, Italian and Japanese counterparts. And it's the worst earthquake to hit Morocco in over 6 decades, laying claim to over 1,000 lives. Welcome back. You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Gautam Roy. And before we take you any further on the show, another look at our top stories. The G20 summit adopts the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration. Host India succeeds in forging a complete consensus on all developmental and geopolitical issues. India's G20 summit produces another landmark initiative. The Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment will build the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, rivaling China's Belt and Road Initiative. And the end of day one of the G20 India Summit sees President Draupadi Murmu hosting all the leaders and select guests for a gala dinner. Well, India and the United States have co-chaired the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investments, as the PGII, to announce the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. It will be a medium for economic integration with West Asia, that is the Middle East as well, and Europe. India's Prime Minister said through this initiative, global South nations will get a boost in several sectors.
ग्लोबल साउथ के अनेक देशों में एक विश्वसनीय पार्टनर के रूप में एनर्जी, रेलवे, वाटर, टेक्नोलॉजी पार्क्स जैसे क्षेत्रों में इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर प्रोजेक्ट्स इंप्लीमेंट किए हैं। इन प्रयासों में हमने डिमांड ड्रिवन और ट्रांसपेरेंट अप्रोच पर विशेष रूप से बल दिया है। पीजीआईआई के माध्यम से हम ग्लोबल साउथ के देशों में इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर गैप को कम करने में महत्वपूर्ण योगदान दे सकते हैं।
Prime Minister Modi also said that connectivity is one of the most important pillars, adding financial viability should be the focus rather than debt burden.
कनेक्टिविटी इनिशिएटिव्स को प्रमोट करते हुए कुछ मूलभूत सिद्धांतों का सुनिश्चित किया जाना महत्वपूर्ण है। डेट बर्डन की जगह फाइनेंशियल वायबिलिटी को बढ़ावा देना और पर्यावरण के सभी मापदंडों का पालन करना। आज जब हम कनेक्टिविटी का इतना बड़ा इनिशिएटिव ले रहे हैं, तब हम आने वाली पीढ़ियों के सपनों के विस्तार के बीज बो रहे हैं।
At the same event, US President Joe Biden said that the economic corridor will work on strengthening ships, rail networks, and members will continue to make the Middle East more prosperous and integrated.
Today, I'm proud to announce that we've finalized a historic agreement for a new India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. As a key part of this corridor, we're going to invest in ships and rail that extends from India all the way to Europe, connected by the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel. Bridging ports across two continents, unlocking endless opportunities, including making it far easier to trade, export clean energy, expand access to reliable, clean electricity, lay cables that will connect communities and secure a stable internet, contributing to a more stable, more prosperous, and integrated Middle East.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said that the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor is historic. It will make the trade between India and Europe 40% faster.
India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. This is nothing but historic. It will be the most direct connection to date between India, the Arabian Gulf, and Europe, with a rail link that will make trade between India and Europe 40% faster. This corridor is much more than just a railway or a cable. It is a green and digital bridge across continents and civilizations.
And the European Commission President also said that Trans-Africa Corridor, which is the second project launched on Saturday, will connect all landlocked African nations with the sea.
The Trans-African Corridor, which will connect the port of Lobito in Angola with the Katanga province in DRC and the Copper Belt in Zambia. Our goal is not only to connect a landlocked region to the sea. Our partnership will also invest in local value chains, in clean energy, and in skills for the local workforce.
And the Saudi Crown Prince lauded this economic corridor that is being set up with cooperation from the US and Saudi Arabia.
I'd like to commend the PGII launched by President Biden with the participation of Saudi Arabia in $20 billion. We look forward to the integration of the initiative and the economic corridor project, which is announced in this meeting. I would like to thank those who worked with us to reach this founding step to establish this important economic corridor My best regard to you all.
And Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni said that this economic corridor will bridge the trade gaps and will also provide linkage to the Indo-Pacific.
This will scale up our economy's growth, opening enormous potential for mutual benefits in the business sector. Obviously, Italy is ready to play a decisive role in this process, also through the unique expertise of Italian companies in the maritime and railway sector. And we want to contribute in building bridges between the Mediterranean and the Indo-Pacific, also in the fields of energy and digital connectivity via Africa and the Arabian Gulf.
And let's also listen to what the Japanese Prime Minister had to say about wanting to expand the initiative by connecting it with people and providing linkages to supply chains.
Forward, we want to take this effort a step further to expand the scope of cooperation to wider areas, including supply chains, to link people together by strengthening connectivity. Japan will continue to lead the effort for tangible implementation of PGII. To do that, partnership with diverse actors who subscribe to its principles is essential.
French President Emmanuel Macron kept his comments brief but was very, very clear that this is a very important corridor and the focus will be on proper implementation.
This is a very important project from Asia through Middle East to Europe to offer big opportunities and connect people. But our intention is as well to make it real and to be sure that after this commitment we have concrete results. Our intention is to have a fair process. I mean, offering a lot of opportunities to manufacture in the different countries and to cooperate very actively on building these roads, building the innovations going with it, and innovating together.
Well, we still have Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan with us to talk about this key development. Really, Ambassador Balakrishnan, Joe Biden was very, very succinct and he hit the nail on the head when he called it a big deal, a real big deal. And I'm sure this must have rung some kind of bells in both Beijing and Islamabad.
Well, I think this is a kind of project which has been talked about for some time. The idea of connecting India with one of the Gulf ports and then through a rail link to Europe. So I'm very glad that at this point the governments have given their support to this particular corridor. It's India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, because it does not involve only transportation links. It involves electricity cables, it involves internet cables, it involves oil and gas and pipelines. So it's a multi-modal, multi-domain corridor. And of course, such a corridor will require that all the countries involved, they use multimodal transport. In other words, containerized transport, which moves smoothly from trucks or train to ports and then back again to trucks and rail. Movement of cargo by rail is much more efficient per ton kilometer. Cost is much less and there is much less emissions. Whereas if you move it by sea, the amount of energy expended and the carbon dioxide emitted is much more. Besides, it's much slower. So this corridor has many advantages from the point of view of climate change as well as speed, as Ursula von der Leyen mentioned. But then it's also got another dimension. That is, business and industries will grow along the corridor. It will encourage industrialization and setting up of industries along the corridor. Now, as far as implementing this corridor is concerned, the governments, of course, should drive the whole project through appropriate funding. But it's not enough for the governments. I think the business and the companies must also be fully engaged because they are the ones who will be actually using the corridor. And organizations, stakeholders who will actually use the corridor must be involved right from the early stage of the project so that they are fully involved. And in fact, even while planning and implementing the corridor, their views should be taken into account. Now, this is a marked contrast to the Chinese BRI model, where it was decided that this will be done, and it was top down, and stakeholders were not consulted. So many of the Chinese BRI projects have run into problems, and even when they're completed, the question is whether they will actually be successful in getting the people to use it. This is a problem even within China. China has made a lot of infrastructure projects, and again, the same disease, that they made these projects without enough consultation of all stakeholders, and now many of these projects are underutilized. So I think this approach of the PGII is much more sound and much more consultative and much more inclusive. And let's say this is the first good step which has happened. The Africa corridor, which has been mentioned, connects DRC, Zambia, and Angola. And this has clearly facilitated the movement of minerals from the Katanga province, which is rich in mineral resources, the Zambian copper belt, which has a lot of copper and other deposits, and taking it out through the Angolan port of Lobito. So this will also help the landlocked countries and regions within Africa to export their production in a much more efficient way. So I think the PGII, at least in these two projects, has got off to a good start. And we hope that it will blossom into much bigger things in the future.
And in this, it's unavoidable to really say and see that Pakistan is one that loses out along with Afghanistan as well, because for years there was that fervent hope that the sea will not have to be, the sea route will not have to be taken. It will be the land route that will, go like a vein through all these countries and territories. But that, it seems, has now been given up for good.
No, I think we have to look at the Chabahar and the Gwadar and those things in a different way. Because as far as Chabahar is concerned, we saw it as a route to Central Asia through Iran. So that is still an option which is, I think, still going to be pursued, but it has not attracted the kind of international support that this one has, because obviously the Saudis and the UAEs are very big players in the Middle East and they have the funds. So while the Chabahar project will sort of take its time and eventually happen, that will go through. As far as Gwadar and port is concerned, this is a Chinese part of the Chinese CPEC. This has both economic and strategic dimensions. Clearly, China wants to have an outlet to the Arabian Sea, and Gwadar is a key part of that. They've also got a strategic element of naval assets being stationed there. And in order to connect with this, Chinese have to build the entire highway through Pakistan, a rail and road corridor, and then across the Himalayas to the Chinese hinterland. This is a very, very, very ambitious and difficult undertaking, and perhaps ultimately it may not be cost effective.
But there's still people who say that the Chinese and the BRI has had an over decade-long head start, and this one is just starting off now. So that is a disadvantage. What would you tell them?
Well, I would say that if you start off on a road journey in the wrong direction, it doesn't matter if you started 10 years ahead. What will happen is you will get lost in the wilderness. That's what's happening. Whereas if you start off on a journey well prepared and, with proper preparations of with all stakeholders and so on, I think you're much more likely to succeed.
Well answered, Ambassador Balakrishnan. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about this major development that is taking place today. A corridor that links India to Europe through the West Asian region, or the Middle East, as the Westerners are used to calling it. Thank you so much for joining us. And the end of day one of the G20 India Summit has seen President Draupadi Murmu hosting all the leaders and select guests for a gala dinner as well. That and more to come up on the News Hour. Keep watching. And it's the worst earthquake as well to hit Morocco in over 6 decades, laying claim to over 1,000 lives. Welcome back. You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Gautam Roy. President Draupadi Murmu has received US President Joe Biden, French President Emmanuel Macron, South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol, along with his spouse, Indonesian President Joko Widodo, along with Iriana Joko Widodo as well, for the gala dinner at the Bharat Mandapam that she's hosting. There you can see these images. President Biden, along with Prime Minister Modi and President Draupadi Murmu, having a quick conversation before heading in for that dinner. It was the two Indian leaders who were receiving all the top leaders who arrived for the G20 summit for this gala dinner as well at the Bharat Mandapam in a hall there at the G20 venue. And after the deliberations, announcements and launches for day one of the G20 summit were all done, it was President Draupadi Murmu and Prime Minister Modi receiving world leaders along with their spouses who've travelled to India for a gala dinner at Bharat Mandapam, the venue of the meet. Among the guests were African Union Chairperson Azali Assoumani, along with his spouse, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, along with his spouse Yuko Kishida, who adores, as is evident, traditional Indian wear. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen with the spouse Heiko von der Leyen, European Union President Charles Michel, Chinese Premier Li Qiang, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and United Kingdom Prime Minister Rishi Sunak with his spouse Akshata Murthy, all leaders being received by the two Indian leaders there, along with other select guests as well. And the start of the dinner also saw President Murmu, Prime Minister Modi receiving ADB President Masatsuga Asakawa, Financial Sustainability Board President Klaus Knott, IMF Director Kristalina Georgieva, UN Chief Antonio Guterres, WHO Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, OECD Secretary General Matthias, and World Bank Head Ajay Banga. The two Indian leaders also received Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Mauritius Prime Minister Pravind Jugnauth, along with his spouse, Netherlands Prime Minister Mark Rutte with his better half, Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, Nigerian President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, Singapore PM Lee Hsien Loong, officials from the UAE, and Spain's Deputy Prime Minister Nadia Calvino. And head of World Bank Ajay Banga lauded the G20 New Delhi leaders' declaration, saying it is a huge success. Listen in.
I'm very happy that India was able to get to a declaration, because I think people were not giving it much chance to get there, but the Prime Minister and his team worked very hard to find a consensus. So it's absolutely a success.
And the day also saw Prime Minister Narendra Modi holding talks with UK's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak on the sidelines of the G20 summit in New Delhi. The two leaders discussed ways to deepen trade linkages and boost investment. After the meeting, Prime Minister Modi wrote on social media that India and the UK will keep working for a prosperous and sustainable planet. And the Prime Minister Modi also held a bilateral meeting with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni on the sidelines of the summit. The talks covered sectors such as trade, commerce, defence, emerging technologies and more. Prime Minister Modi said that India and Italy will keep working together for global prosperity. There was another bilateral that the PM had with his Japanese counterpart, Kishida Fumio. There was a bilateral meeting on the sidelines of the G20 summit. After the meeting, Prime Minister Modi wrote on social media that he had productive talks with Prime Minister Kishida. Both the leaders took stock of India-Japan bilateral ties and the ground covered during India's G20 presidency and Japan's G7 presidency. Prime Minister Modi further added that both of them are eager to enhance cooperation in connectivity, commerce and other sectors. Now, in another part of the world, a powerful earthquake has killed over 1,000 people and reduced countless buildings to rubble in Morocco. According to the Interior Minister of that country, the quake of 6.8 magnitude was most strongly felt near the city of Marrakesh.
A massive quake struck Morocco late on Friday, sending terrified residents fleeing from their homes in the middle of the night. Several buildings collapsed and the rubble fell onto the road, smashing up cars.
A 7-magnitude earthquake was recorded on Friday night, September 8 at around 11 p.m. Its epicenter was located in Igil.
Strong tremors were also felt in other cities. People were too afraid to go back indoors and opted to spend the night on the streets.
In the beginning, I heard a piece of metal making noise. I thought it was a cat, but it was not. Then I heard people screaming and I realized that it is an earthquake, and I told my family to leave the house.
Victims had horrific tales of what happened when the quake first struck.
The room started shaking, there's no other way. We was going backwards and forwards and everything started moving and pictures started moving, and so we just grabbed some clothes and our bags and we raced out.
Meanwhile, Morocco's civil protection forces gathered truckloads of supplies to be sent to quake zones on Saturday morning. An official said most of the deaths were in the high Atlas mountain areas that are harder to reach. During opening remarks for the G20 summit in New Delhi, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi offered to help.
मैं अपनी हार्दिक संवेदना प्रकट करना चाहता हूं। हम प्रार्थना करते हैं कि सभी इंजर्ड लोग शीघ्र स्वस्थ हो। इस कठिन समय में पूरा विश्व समुदाय मोरक्को के साथ है और हम उन्हें हर संभव सहायता पहुंचाने के लिए तैयार हैं।
As night turned to day, the true toll of the quake became clear. This is the country's deadliest tremor in more than 6 decades. Amit Mukherjee reports for DD India.
So the death toll already passed 1,000 and could climb even further. Terrible tragedy to befall Morocco. Now back to G20, and a craft bazaar has been set up at the summit venue in New Delhi, showcasing traditional handicrafts from across the country. The Bendu model reports.
India through G20 is trying to showcase its soft power and soft power diplomacy. Behind me is India's intrinsic form of craft, which is khadi, and you can see this skillful man rolling the khadi charkha, which has been a part of India's art and culture. Here at the Crafts Bazaar set up near the International Media Center at Bharat Mandapam has been displaying intrinsic form of arts and crafts from across India. Here it is Rajasthan's Lak bangle making, which is considered to be a dying art of Rajasthan, is being displayed here for delegates to come and experience India's heritage form of art and craftsmanship.
ये हमारा लाक का जयपुर का राजस्थान का सुहाग है और ये डाइंग क्राफ्ट है और इसको जो है हमारे शादी होती है तो जब लाक पहनते हैं और जब बच्चा पैदा होता है जब भी लाक की चूड़ी पहनते हैं बड़ा महत्व है।
Even terracotta products, which is traditional form of art and pottery, is displayed here at Bharat Mandapam, here where the craftsman is giving live demonstration of how terracotta products are made here. We'll speak to him and understand what traditional this form of art is about.
मेरा नाम गिरिराज प्रसाद है और ये टेराकोटा कला में मुझे नेशनल अवार्ड भारत सरकार से मिला हुआ है और टेराकोटा का जो काम है ये बहुत प्राचीन काम है। ये मोहनजोदड़ो के टाइम से हमारी ये सभ्यता में चला आ रहा है और मिट्टी का जो टेराकोटा का काम है ये हमारे पुराने जमाने से खाने पकाने के बर्तनों में और हमारी संस्कृति से जुड़ा हुआ है।
As you heard, the craftsmen who have come here from across the country, from various districts and states, are expecting that the delegates that will come here will give them not only business but will also appreciate the traditional form of art and culture, where India will be able to showcase its soft power diplomacy through its cultural heritage, which is in India for thousands of years. This is Dibyendu Mondal for DD India from New Delhi.
So different colors of India for all the G20 delegates. And that's all we have for the moment in this edition of DD India News Hour. And we're leaving you now with stunning lighting images from Bharat Mandapam, which is the venue of the G20 summit, as a culmination of day one. Take a look, enjoy the great lighting, and have a great evening.